All right, then we all read the copy and example and pronounce a little bit. We're starting with the second part of our session, energy management, policy and economics. Now the first presentation is by Kester on powering fairness, how it impacts to residential energy efficiency program efforts. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Kester. I'm a researcher from Carnegie Mellon University, and I'm grateful you just had something to eat and drink. So I have your attention. But just to start things off, maybe we can do a show of hands. Has anyone ever experienced a really warm day without air conditioning? My local apartments in Pittsburgh was sort of an attic with very little insulation, single pane windows, and so sometimes in the summer when it got above like 85 degrees, 68 degrees, I intentionally leave your day to not have to run my AC all day. And so we might think about it as a mundane summer activity just to survive the heat. But we could actually also sort of define that as because we're not really able to maintain a comfortable temperature. And instead, we're sort of keeping that house into a pretty full temperature. Now, this example in this picture shows someone in Arizona that actually maintained 93 degrees inside their pool. And so energy deficits are actually really widespread in almost 10% of the households, 12 million households in 2020 experienced some form of energy deficit. So these are just some signs that we think about energy insecurity. And how do we define that? Firstly, we look at someone facing a situation where they're spending just a large proportion of their income on energy bills. They might face some risk of misdirection just because they might not be able to pay a bill in a specific month. And then, like we were talking about before, just not using energy for heating or cooling. It's sort of having to withstand really unsafe or significantly uncomfortable temperature at home. And so I'm here to talk today about how we might use energy efficiency programs to sort of mitigate these issues. Specifically, some examples of that are audits, loans, and levies. And so an audit is really an inspection where we might come to the home, look at your energy use, identify potential losses, and then make recommendations for saving energy. A loan is looking at really thinking about upgrading your life, and so some financing that might make that affordable for some homes, and then rebates similarly for when you upgrade your appliance, reducing the price of the appliance that you're purchasing. And so maybe to put that into context, how that might have some in Arizona last year, 1 in 4 heat-related deaths occurred in indoor and cool environments. Now, in most cases, there wasn't heat present, but it was either not working without electricity or turned off. Now, when we look at who's affected by that, we think older residents, low-income residents, and sometimes folks who are living alone. And audits really could help here by identifying potential loss to help reduce that bill and potentially sort of reduce the risk of disconnection, but also just make it more affordable to use energy for necessities like heating, cooling. And then having an AC, but in law free, this really does identify the hot plant free. There's no reading from laws how fun just to fall to make that. And so sort of looking at these interventions, they may be down to the particulars how those reach the household need. And we see here that there's significant investment going into energy efficiency programs across the building. And so on average, higher income households are very good educated, higher single family homes. But only 30% of that investment is going directly to low income homes. Now we talked about the energy deficits, which are earlier, but when we think about after one home rental households, things about where they took a lot of home and it would be very challenging in terms of things, there's some intervention that we need to sort of address the gap. Now, the other aspects of energy efficiency programs are thinking about thinking. We sort of use that program to sort of help folks save money on their bills. And this graph is showing just some comparison of three different studies of what experts projected as the savings for non-profit development programs, and then what the real savings actually were. And we see here that they just don't math, but they're going to go always less than what is projected. Now, in some cases, that might be more being used, but potentially for some households, so the providers are actually going to use more energy more than 70 potential like cooling. And so there's a gap here in understanding just how these programs have those specific households can be. And so this brings me to my research question I'm going to talk about today. We're going to think about what factors affect the utility participate in energy efficiency programs. And then we're going to talk about one method to reduce the energy burden. And that's a ratio. We're going to take it at a monthly sort of level, but a ratio of how much somebody is spending a month on energy for total income for that saving. Because we're going to have a thing other people a lot of the example that I'm going to use in this presentation. Now, we're going to use the case study in Colorado. Now, you can sort of see that most folks are participating in podcasts, and there are a few in a season that might do it all, but also do some other corporate radios. But for this presentation, I'm going to do two things. We'll focus on subset of radios, just from 2015. And we're doing some comparison analysis, so just looking at all the using rates and understanding how these specific programs have the effects. Now, I hope we all know where Florida is. But if you don't know where Tallahassee is, for being a blue marker, you can mark with all theory plants. And we talked about the consumption from each household. We know when we're participating. But the other piece of information that we're pulling are from the American Community Survey and Data Census that's giving us some background for the households. And then we also sort of used ridiculous weather data to see just how different environments were taking as like time goes on. And so once we sort of take that, we'll first look at the decision to participate. And so we look at things seasonally, just because at that level, we might not be able to get much information. And then we sort of run regressions to understand that household decision to participate. Now, I'm going to talk about like what variables we're using just to solve. And household monthly sort of energy consumption, so that at a household level. But some other variables that we look at a block, a central block level, are looking at sort of rain, the proportion of gravity in that community, and then we'll probably older only right. And then at the sort of final level, we have the tracks, and that will range, but you can think of a lot of energy about investments. Track will tell us a bit more about the median household income, and then those will be called in tracks. And so we have all variables. And what we use is on the decision graphing. So we're really trying to sound value to policy, but that means really that would be no. So the decision graphing basically just follows a probability of whether somebody more than likely to pause or more than likely to fall. And so once we get it down to over 0.5 per decade, maybe getting fall. And what I'm going to use to interpret these findings is something called an offering. And that's going to be important here. But you can think about it, you can think of the problem, give something possible if you divide them by columns and then not columns. So it's like a sort of a ratio of the columns, so to speak. So let's see what we found. I'm going to talk about each program individually. But just because qualified and the last show that streaming as a little extended block also with an offering, they were your open to the problem of pigs. Another block with about 420% than not. They're really likely to take off. And when you compare that to Hispanic customers, the problem of is only just about 40% of law population. So we see here that after the Islamic household, those with high prevalent college degree, and then renting out are less likely to take part in politics. Now, for loan, we see a sort of slightly shift where the set of groups that are renters and then Asian households are less likely to take part. But then when we look at rebates, we see that the Black household and again, renters are less likely to participate. So it kind of varies by the program. But overall, something we did notice is that renting populations are just much less likely to take part in the programs. And future programs should sort of target that group for some sports. Now, going on to the second bit of this work, we really wanted to understand just how energy burden, that metric, changed as those participated in these programs. And again, that energy burden is again monthly energy bill over total income. And what we did was look at a sort of the year before and the year after that participation, and sort of identify what was the maps that they might have faced. So if they had an emergency before and an emergency after, how did that maps change relative to when they participated? And so just to kind of show you how that starts, we have a graph here that shows the energy burden on the vertical axis, and I've grouped it by different income levels. So we have three groups here, and the red field denotes before they participated, and then the gray is after. And you see here that there's really not a significant dip for folks who participate in the rebates. But for loans, we do see sort of a notable dip across all the different income groups. And then again, for audits, not a significant or consistent change in pattern. But one thing that is really notable is that for that lowest income group, the energy burden is almost double that of the other groups. And so they are actually facing just a higher overall cost. And that makes sense because their income might be a lot lower, but the bills across the groups might not vary just as much. So thinking about that last bit of energy and security, we wanted to sort of see just using a method of someone becoming energy insecure if their energy burden goes past 10%. So we wanted to see just as folks participate in these programs, how did that affect them becoming energy insecure or not? And so we used the same sort of max burden that we were talking about before, but now just relatively looking at the change in burden. And so there are sort of four categories. If you could think of it, folks might have already started with a burden above 10%, or they might have started with a burden below 10%, right? And in those cases, they would have remained in that situation if they didn't have a change that made them sort of go from above 10% to below. But what we're really interested in is those who sort of became energy insecure, even though you can see that that's not the majority of folks. They sort of stayed where they were. So in overall, audits were really the most popular program. Most folks started with audits, but looking at sort of the relative proportions, almost half of those participants in audits started in an energy insecure situation, relative to a third in loans, and almost a fifth who participated in rebates. But then those groups that sort of became insecure that became secure after participating, only 15% of those insecure groups from audits had sort of that benefit, relative to almost 30% or above 30% for the loans and the rebates. And so a takeaway that we identified from this was looking at actually encouraging those who take part in audits to maybe make the changes that might help them sort of do a loan or a rebate and actually upgrade an appliance to experience that benefit that we're looking at. Now, these are some just initial exploratory results that we've been trying to frame together. And so what we're really interested in understanding further is just how the seedlings come into play. And then for folks who do participate in multiple programs, what benefits do they actually see? And can we sort of isolate that? And so the plans for the future work is just thinking of how we can sort of regress the actual burden and consumption. And thinking also about energy temperature sensitivity, so how folks might react to cold weather outside and whether that changes as they participate. But in conclusion, I just wanted to summarize that, we talked about audit, rebates, and loans, and how they might help mitigate energy insecurity in Tallahassee. And so we found that across all the programs, renting populations are correlated with less participation, and that comparing the energy burdens, that lowest income group, under $25,000 a year, faces nearly double the max energy burden of the other groups. And that audits had twice the participation, but almost half the energy security impacts relative to loans and rebates. And so the big takeaways here were really just targeting renters with participating in any program just to increase that group and allowing them to take part. And then encouraging those groups who do the audits to actually go through the process of participating in other programs as well, specifically the loans and the rebate. But with that, I will pause. Thank you all for listening, and I can open the floor for questions.
Thank you very much. Questions?
Always be asking a question. I'm wondering if you go back to looking at sort of the energy efficiency paradox and the fact that basically a lot of people did institute when they had programs the energy efficiency and insulating their buildings and things like that. Whether there's hidden transaction costs here that you haven't captured, and also because a lot of the programs are, even though you haven't said it, but are kind of means tested, and so there's all those kind of other socioeconomic aspects that may mean that they're not doing, people aren't going through the sort of issues that you're trying to address and deal with.
Yeah, and we can't perfectly capture the sort of change. I think in terms of how we looked at this, really just comparing overall change. But you're right. I think in terms of some of the folks who are doing audits, they might have had an already very high energy bill, and that's why they're doing the audit. And a lot of those folks might be lower income and they're not have the means to sort of put in the insulation or buy that piece of equipment. And so one thing that we're not able to fully say is that benefit that we even saw for the other programs, like the loans or the rebates, that might be correlated with most sort of higher income and have the means, like you're describing, to make the changes. And so what we're hoping to do is find some ways to either simulate control or find ways to compare to groups who might not be exactly that group in that low income, but as they participate in these other programs, have a way to compare just what that impact might be. But you're right. I think it would still be some form of a comparison. We can't really give a causal relationship here for what that change in participation would cause.
Yeah.
So wonderful stuff, and great to see such a large data set. And so it was like 331,000 data points, which is amazing to get it from one municipal areas. Congratulations on doing that. You highlighted really clearly in the talk the challenge of reaching renters. We don't have good policies for renters, split incentive problem from landlord renters, all that. But then right at the end here, you answered this question with this comment about insulation. Right, and many renters are not even, they're not, they can't do it even if it would benefit them, even if the payback time is quick. So, because I don't think we're going to solve the problem of not enough incentive for renters today, although I wish we would, or Justice 40 would. Well, I guess what I'm wondering is, are there subpopulations you could look at? For example, people who are in a homeowners association where there's solar, or when there's community property. There are some low income communities in California where there's some group ownership. Are there interesting subgroups that you might be able to look at in future so that you can take a second dive on this? Because finding solutions is often about finding things that work in a subset. You can then scale up.
Yeah, I mean, I think one layer of this could be looking at the lower income census tracts alone and seeing just how among that set of people, what the changes might be. Some other groups that we might look at are just thinking of folks who have already participated in an audit how they might react as they participate in other programs. So just if they're comparable in the sense that they took part in the audit, maybe then we could compare just what changes take place if they participate in the other programs. But yeah, we're still sort of trying to figure out what the best subgroupings might be. I think those are two that we might start to try to look at to start.
Reference when for the right. On the rent unit.
No, so these households are, well, just to take a quick step back. So the renting percentage here from the sort of annual community survey. And so it's really a ratio of how many households in that census tract are renters divided by the total number of houses in that tract. But what this is sort of accounting for is the households that are renters. So not the landlords themselves, but the household could be an apartment, it could be a house, a single family home, but just that unit where someone's living.
Right. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay.
Move on to the-